Hi Year 6. This week I'm going to share with you probably my favourite book that we ever get to read in school and get to learn about and teach in school. And that book is called Kensuke's Kingdom. Now I know Miss Bryant read a Michael Morpurgo book with you last time, so I'm going to share with you the first chapter of the book today. And then I will have the book available in school if anyone wants to carry on reading when you get back next week. We won't be doing it as part of any lessons, but I would really recommend reading it because it is an excellent book. So we'll start off from chapter 1. Chapter 1 is called The Peggy Sue. I disappeared on the night before my 12th birthday, July the 28th, 1988. Only now can I at last tell the whole extraordinary story, the true story. Kensuke made me promise that I would say nothing at all, until at least 10 years had passed. It was almost the last thing he said to me. I promised, and because of that, I have had to live out a lie. I could let sleeping lies sleep on, but more than 10 years have passed now, and I have done school, done college, and had time to think. I owe it to my family and to my friends, all of whom I have deceived for so long, to tell the truth about my long disappearance, about how I lived and I came back from the dead. But there is another reason for speaking out now, a far better reason. Kensuke was a great man, a good friend, and he was my friend. I want the world to know him as I knew him. Until I was nearly 11, until the letter came, life was just normal. There were the 4 of us in my house, my mother, my father, me, and Stella. Stella Artois, that is my one ear up, one ear down, black and white sheepdog, who always seemed to know what was about to happen before it did. But even she could not have foreseen the letter that was going to change our lives forever. Thinking back, there was a regularity, a sameness about my early childhood. It was a down the road each morning to the monkey school, my father called it. My father called it that because he said the children gibbered and screeched and hung upside down on the climbing frame in the playground. And anyway, I was always a monkey face to him, when he was in a playful mood, that is, which he often was. The school was really called St. Joseph's, and I was happy there for most of the time. Anyway, after school every day, whatever the weather, I'd be off down the recreation ground for football with Eddie Dodds, my best friend in the whole world. Him, Matt, Bobby, and the others. It was muddy down there. Cross the ball and it would just land and stick. We had our own team, the Mudlarks we called ourselves. And we were good too. Visiting teams seemed to expect the ball to bounce for some reason, and by the time they realised it didn't, we were often 2 or 3 goals up. We weren't so good away from home. Every weekend, I did a paper round from Mr. Patel's shop in the corner. I was saving up for a mountain bike. I wanted to go mountain biking up the moors with Eddie. The trouble was, I would keep spending what I saved. I'm still the same that way. Sundays were always special. I remember we'd go dinghy sailing, all of us on the reservoir. Stella Artois barking her head off at the other boats as if they had no right to be there. My father loved it, he said, because the air was clean, no brick dust. He worked down at the brickworks. He was a great do-it-yourself fanatic. There was nothing he couldn't fix, even if it didn't need fixing. So he was in his element on a boat. My mother, who worked part-time in the office at the same brickworks, revelled in it too. I remember her once throwing back her head in the wind and breathing in deep as she sat at the tiller. "This is it," she cried. "This is how life is supposed to be. Wonderful, just wonderful." She always wore the blue cap. She was the undisputed skipper. If there was a breeze out there, she'd find it and catch it. She had a real nose for it. We had some great days on the water. We'd go out when it was rough, when no one else would. We'd go skimming over the waves, exhilarating in the speed of it, in the sheer joy of it. And if there wasn't a breath of wind, we didn't mind that either. Sometimes we'd be the only boat on the whole reservoir. We'd just sit and fish instead. By the way, I was better at fishing than either of them, and Stella Artois would be curled up behind the boat. bored with the whole thing because there was no one to bark at. Then the letter arrived. Stella savaged it as it came through the letterbox. There were puncture holes in it and it was damp, but we could read enough. The brickworks were going to close down. My dad's job was going to end. They were both being made redundant. There was a terrible silence at the breakfast table that morning. After that, we never went sailing on Sundays anymore. I didn't have to ask why not. They both tried to find other jobs, but there was nothing. A creeping misery came over the house. Sometimes I'd come home and they just wouldn't be speaking. They'd argue a lot about the niggly things, and they'd never been like that before. My father stopped fixing things around the house. He was scarcely ever home anyway. If he wasn't looking for a job, he'd be down the pub. When he wasn't home, he'd just be sitting flicking through endless yachting magazines and saying nothing. I tried to stay out of the house and play football as much as I could, but then Eddie moved away because his father had found a job somewhere down south. Football just wasn't the same without him. The Mudlarks disbanded, everything was falling apart. Then, one Saturday, I came home from my paper round and found my mother sitting at the bottom of the stairs crying. She'd always been so strong. I'd never seen her like this before. "Silly beggar," she said. "Your dad's a silly beggar, Michael. That's what he is." "What's he done?" I asked her. "He's gone off," she told me, and I thought she meant for good. He wouldn't hear reason. "Oh no, he's had this idea," he says. "He wouldn't tell me what it is, only that he sold the car, that we're moving south, and he's going to find us a place." I was relieved, quite pleased really. South must be nearer to Eddie. She went on, "If he thinks I'm leaving this house, then I'm telling you, he's got another thing coming." "Why not?" I said. "Not much here." "Well, there's the house for a start, then there's Gran and there's school." "There's other schools," I told her. She became steamingly angry then, angrier than I'd ever known her. "You want to know what was the last straw?" she said. "It was you, Michael. You going off on your paper round this morning. You know what your dad said? Well, I'll tell you, shall I? Do you know something?" he says. "There's only one lousy wage coming into this house. Michael's paper money. How do you think that makes me feel, eh? My son's 11 years old. He's got a job and I haven't." She steadied herself for a moment or two before she went on, her eyes filled with fierce tears. "I'm not moving, Michael. I was born here. I'm not going. No matter what he says, I'm not leaving." I was there when the phone call came a week or so later. I knew it was my father. My mother said very little, so I couldn't understand what was going on, not until she sat me down afterwards and told me. "He sounds different, Michael. I mean, like his old self, like his very old self, like he used to be when I first knew him. He's found us a place. Just pack us your stuff and come," he says. "Fareham, somewhere near Southampton, right by the sea," he says. "There's something very different about him. I'm telling you." My father did indeed seem like a changed man. He was waiting for us when we all got off the train, all bright-eyed and full of laughter. He helped us with our cases. "It's not far," he said, ruffling my hair. "You wait till you see it, monkey face. I've got it all sorted, the whole thing, and it's no good trying to talk me out of it, either of you. I've made up my mind." "What about?" I asked. "You'll see," he said. Stella Artois bounded along ahead of us, her tail high and happy. We all felt like that, I think. In the end, we caught a bus because the cases were too heavy. When we got off, we were right by the sea. There didn't seem to be any houses anywhere, just a yachting marina. "What are we doing here?" my mother asked. "There's someone I want you to meet. A good friend of mine. She's called Peggy Sue. She's been looking forward to meeting you. I've told her all about you." My mother frowned at me in puzzlement. I wasn't any the wiser either. All I knew for certain that he was deliberately being mysterious. He struggled with one of our suitcases. The gulls crying overhead, the yacht mast clapping around us, and Stella yapping at all of it, until at last she stopped right by the gangplank that led up to a gleaming dark blue yacht. He put the cases down and turned to face us. He was grinning from ear to ear. Here she is, he said. "Let me introduce you. This is Peggy Sue, our new home." Well, considering everything, my mother took it pretty well. She didn't shout at him. She just went very quiet. And she stayed quiet all through his explanation down in the galley over a cup of tea. It wasn't a spur of the moment thing, you know. I've been thinking about it for a long time. All those years working in the factory. All right, maybe I was just dreaming about it in those days. Funny when you think about it. If I hadn't lost my job, if I had never dared to, I wouldn't have dared to, not in a million years. He knew he wasn't making much sense. All right then, here's what I thought. What is that we all love doing the most? Sailing, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful, I thought, if we could just take off and sail around the world? There's people who have done it. Blue water sailing, they call it. I've read about it in the magazines. Like I said, it was a dream to start with. And then no job and no chance of a job. What did the man say? Get on your bike? So why not a boat? We've got our redundancy money. What little there was of it, there's a bit saved up and the car money. Not a fortune, but enough. What to do with it? I could put it all in a bank like the others did. But for what for? Just to watch it dribble away until there's nothing left? Or I thought I could do something really special with it. A once-in-a-lifetime thing. We could sail all around the world. Africa, South America, Australia, the Pacific. We could see the places we've only dreamed of. We'll start on chapter 2 next time.